Chauncey Dunn. Representing Chauncey today is one of, I think it's 18 members of their family that are here, so the Dunn family is well represented. Eric Luck is going to come up in a minute. Eric knew Chauncey for over 40 years. Originally started dating his daughter, who then became his wife. It doesn't say that out here, but we know. Eric slept on many hotel room floors while crewing for and flying with Chauncey and his family throughout the U.S. After sharing Eric married in '76, Eric became a pilot and helped design a balloon with Chauncey. Eric flew his own balloon from '78 through '84 and continued on with Chauncey from time to time, and Eric still has a license, so he doesn't say if he's flown much anymore. I'd like to bring up Eric Luck. On behalf of the National Balloon Museum and the Balloon Federation of America, we'd like to induct Chauncey M. Dunn into the U.S. National Balloon Hall of Fame.
If I can do this with Chauncey staring at me all the time. Thank you to the National Balloon Museum, the U.S. Ballooning Hall of Fame. You've chosen a well-deserved member for this Hall of Fame. The 18 members of our family who are here with us today are really honored that you recognize Chauncey. Over all the 43 years that I knew Chauncey, not once did it occur to me I'd be coming back to Indianola and be standing in front of you telling you about him. Those of you who didn't know him might want to brace yourselves a little bit. Chauncey was born in Elgin, Illinois in January 1932, and he moved to Denver, Colorado with his family as a toddler. He always said that he got to Colorado as fast as he could. Chauncey's sister Carol and all three of her children and an excellent assortment of grandchildren are also here today. Today you'll hear other examples of things Chauncey said that sounded like great sound bites, and that's because he was a reporter's dream. While he spent a lot of time going to all parts of the globe throughout his life, including all 7 continents, he never lived anywhere but Denver. He never wanted to live anywhere except Colorado. He was an avid outdoorsman, a skier, a hunter, a fisherman, a scuba diver, four-wheeler, and river rafter, enjoying everything Colorado had to offer. Chauncey graduated from Cathedral High School in Denver and Colorado State University and served as a United States Marine. Chauncey's first career was in real estate, where he built a tremendously successful company. In the early 1950s, he and his wife Marie searched familiar Denver neighborhoods for rundown houses or houses to buy and fix up and rent or sell. And because he could talk anyone into anything, pretty soon he had other people doing the exact same thing for him. Chauncey and Marie applied a really unique plan to their real estate career. If they couldn't afford it, they didn't buy it, and they waited till they could. And we all took a lesson from watching that happen. In the summer of 1966, Chauncey took his first trip down the Grand Canyon on a raft, and he was hooked for life. Eventually, he outfitted for his own Dunn's River Rats, conducting tours through the canyon, but only for friends and family. Now, you have to understand that with Chauncey, everyone was in the friends category, and the rest of us were family. He had no peers with his talent, and you have to understand that the family did not view this as a fault. It was simply entertainment for us. He spent many years shooting the rapids on rivers throughout the United States, but he always returned to the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon as the ultimate. Now, ultimate was a very favorite goal of Chauncey with all his activities. The ultimate rafting was in the Grand Canyon, and as the number of rafting permits became fewer through the canyon, it became more difficult to get a permit than it did to survive the canyon itself. Such bureaucratic difficulties were not his cup of tea. Chauncey began to spend more of his time hot air ballooning. Becoming fascinated with hot air balloons in 1969, Chauncey bought his first balloon over the phone from Raven Industries in Sioux Falls. And of course, he bought it sight unseen. He'd never seen the balloon before. On the recommendation from the boys at Raven, I don't know if you were there then, or
Came slightly later.
The boys at Raven recommended that he contact Carl Steffen of Minneapolis, Minnesota, to learn more about his newly ordered balloon. Chauncey had already named the balloon Stratosaurus. The ballooning turned out to be more than just a fun way to promote his real estate business. Carl was a balloon pilot and a scientist about to transfer jobs to the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. Carl has repeated this story in front of many of you before, but in their phone conversations, Carl asked Chauncey who was helping him get his license. And Chauncey famously replied altogether, remember, this was after he bought the balloon. The deal was struck exchanging Carl's piloting instruction for Carl using Chauncey's new balloon for high-altitude research. Carl became his instructor, his friend, his collaborator in setting a hot air altitude record. They worked together collecting all the equipment needed, conducting test flights. They both went through training at Lowry Air Force Base in their high-altitude chamber. Their test flights went well, and they learned a great deal from them. One of the things those test flights clarified for them is that they weren't going to be able to fly together. The weight, you just couldn't carry the weight of two men. Whenever I heard Chauncey tell this story about this time, he would always express extreme admiration for Carl's scientifically based methods and approach to achieving their goals. Chauncey knew that his own personality led him to just want to go, but he knew Carl was really good for him. Many times over the years, Chauncey told about how much he learned in training with Carl. When asked about his preparation for the flight, he often responded about the spacesuit, about his diet, exercise, losing some weight, taking over 40 parachute jumps. But he always said the biggest key for him personally was just not being very bright. He said that wasn't his job because he had Carl on his side. As they made test flights, Carl's planning limited their advancement in altitude to 2,000 feet higher on each successive test flight. Carl knew there was much to figure out before they went higher, and Chauncey accepted that Carl was quite correct about that plan. While there was a clear goal, the most important thing to Chauncey was the journey, and we saw that over and over again throughout his life. After much preparation, with the arrival of good weather on June 9th, 1971, they let out the balloon, and then they tossed a coin to see who would fly first. I am so disappointed to report that I have never found a copy of the coin flip, a copy of a picture. I would love to see a photograph of the coin flip. Carl won the flip. And one little known item that you won't read anywhere is that before they flipped the coin, they agreed that if the first attempt reached 37,000 feet, there would be no further attempts in 1971 because they knew that it would flame out between 30 and 40,000 feet somewhere. So to fly higher, they really believed that there had to be an oxygen-enriched propane or some other mix of some other fuel that they hadn't researched yet. So Carl's flight went according to plan, but his oxygen exhaust valve froze up. It wasn't an extreme danger, but eventually it led him to have to terminate the flight. But he set a world record at 31,000 feet. With the project a tremendous success already, only a few days later when the weather was just right, Chauncey got his chance. And during Chauncey's flight, he rode through a cloud strata at 26,000 feet, which produced a tremendous in-cloud snowstorm. And he, in spite of being in Colorado, of course, he had never flown through a snowstorm before. He said it was just surreal. Sport ballooning, they had learned from Carl's flight, though, when his oxygen relief valve had frozen, because when Chauncey went to 32,949, he heated the exhaust valve. And what he used was an electric ski sock from his drawer at home, and it just worked beautifully. So they both got their names in the world record book. None of our family will be surprised when I tell you that Chauncey did not tell his wife Marie that the altitude attempt was to be that day. She heard about it when a Denver Post reporter called the house asking for a comment on the day of the flight. And she had a few descriptive things to say to Chauncey, but those comments did not make the papers. If it was important to Chauncey, Marie called for the right to tell him he was an idiot for thinking it was so important. Whether she thought he was an idiot or not, she wanted to be there that day. The most interesting part to me was observing that he didn't just humor her concerns. The only time he withered in the least was when she sincerely criticized him for not telling her. because she wanted to be there. As we were all reflected over those times, none of us could remember him excluding Marie from such major events, just the major ones, after that time. Eventually, the lure of outdoors was brighter than another rush hour in traffic to get to the office, and so he retired from Dunn Real Estate at the age of 42, closed the doors, went home, and just did ballooning. He continued to contribute to the growth of ballooning in Colorado and the West, representing Raven for over 20 years. He was continuously involved in selling balloons, training pilots according to his insistent standards, always willing to lend an advisory hand based on his significant acquired knowledge. He and Marie traveled to ballooning events across the United States with friends and family. Besides his interest in improving balloon system design, it brought Chauncey great joy to tinker with balloon hauling improvements, often arriving at the next race with his latest improvement in tow to show off to his colleagues. The idea of floating on the winds in silence drew him to gas ballooning in the 80s, and he and Marie went to Switzerland to consult with Ernst Krauer about the proper manner to explore it in the United States. And he and his buddies formed the Colorado and Rocky Mountain Gas Balloon Society. And Ernst and his wife came to Colorado and met with the Dunns and flew here as well. By 1979, he had not shaken his desire to set another world altitude record. Chauncey and Marie both came here to Indianola that July. The planning for this attempt had been open, and we all had been including in the planning discussions. After nearly a year of that planning, one early August morning, he launched from a field south of Indianola right before dawn. Chauncey piloted Bearcat to 53,226 feet to again break the world altitude record. On his ascent, Chauncey was sighted by a surprised Continental Airlines jet at 35,000 feet. Where they gave him some valuable weather information. I'm not sure how valuable it was. That was his word. His spacesuit kept him comfortable at 70 below zero at 50,000 feet. But somewhere there was a tiny leak in his suit. And Chauncey got very sick. The descent became way too exciting when the burners flamed out. He had difficulty relighting and the envelope began collapsing. Chauncey described the balloon to be flapping like a rag during the initial 2,700 feet per minute plunge. Even leveling off for an extended time and a more realistic attitude did not prevent him from getting the bends. And he came down very sick. Now imagine there's not a lot of hyperbaric chambers in central Iowa, but they found one, took him by ambulance to Des Moines, and another exciting venture came to a good end. Throughout the years, I've sometimes heard and read about what a daredevil Chauncey was. I'm struck by the fact that each description like that was put forward by a reporter who really didn't know him very well. It might not make as good a story, but I will tell you that whether it was a world record attempt, an instruction session with an inspiring pilot, or a ride for one of his or one of your grandchildren, Chauncey was all about landing safely so we could all go flying again tomorrow. There's no doubt that he thought about doing things that would not occur to most of us, might occur to some of these guys in here. But there was never a daredevil thought like, let's jump off that building and see what will happen. Well, there's no doubt that part of his personality would find jumping off that building to have some allure. But always there's a sense of preparing well and doing it right. We were all grateful for this early relationship he had with Carl, for showing him the rewards for planning well over even the simplest of endeavors. Those lessons had a big impact on the rest of Chauncey's ballooning career. Time to move to bigger projects. Chauncey and Marie started a mini storage business in Denver, and the Dunns spent more and more time in Maui, which they loved. Marie often thought that it kept Chauncey's mind off bigger and riskier ballooning ideas, and it did some. Whenever they returned to Denver, ballooning and travel were the main parts of their agenda. During the 80s, grandchildren began arriving in Chauncey's scene, and the grandchildren were simply blended into ballooning just like it was meant to be. Chauncey's oldest grandson, my son Evan, is here today with his son Enzo, Chauncey's great-grandson. Listen, I know we're here to honor Chauncey and his ballooning endeavors, but I have to tell you that much of what he was able to accomplish in his life was enabled by an outstanding and loving partner for over half his life. In fact, my mother-in-law, Mad Dog Marie Dunn, was often his supervising partner. He would resent me saying so, even though he knew it to be true. But his family is thankful that she was that, and I can assure you that Chauncey was thankful as well. There was an endless supply of side projects between balloon flights during that time, starting in 1973 with Dream of Flight, built by the Balloon Works. Chauncey designed and had built a string of balloons that had envelopes that were hand-painted. Each was a work of art and a collaborative effort with the artists, and he remained friends with those artists the rest of his life. During a dinner in the Bahamas at the Bahamas to USA balloon race in 1975, Malcolm Forbes told Chauncey he had to have Dream of Flight to put in his new balloon museum in France. Chauncey agreed to sell him the balloon, but Malcolm would only agree if Chauncey and Marie came to France for the dedication and opening of the balloon museum. As far as we know, Dream of Flight is still there. Many years of study were devoted how to take a gas balloon and circumnavigate the Earth. Such an endeavor went as far as sponsor solicitation before that effort finally ended. The thrill of the hunt was stopped by something that was totally out of control by all of us. Marie was stricken with cancer and became very ill. After that time, every project took a backseat. Chauncey's marriage to Marie lasted 43 years until her death in 1996. They had 2 daughters. Their oldest is my wife of 38 years, Sherry. And their youngest is Kelly, who was once the youngest licensed balloon pilot in the United States, but we're not the youngest anymore, are we? Chauncey was close to both of us husbands, John and me, and we were lucky to share in ballooning adventures with the whole family. After Marie became ill, his ballooning adventures became much more limited in scope because he never left her side. The intense fun that was ballooning had really been a joint effort between the two of them. In spite of losing Marie, Chauncey never lost his love for the sport or for flying. Chauncey and Marie had 3 grandchildren and now 2 great-grandsons, and his love of family was always a priority in his life. Now, if I haven't convinced you he was lucky enough already, Chauncey was absurdly fortunate to find and be married to another loving partner, Greta, who's with us today, for 15 years until his death in 2013. This added a whole new family with her 3 children. He enjoyed much love and laughter with Greta's 9 grandchildren and now 6 great-grandchildren, and I think another one on the way. He and Greta maintained all those relationships brought about by Chauncey's ballooning years. All of us admire and miss his adventurous spirit and playful approach to life. His legacy lives on in all of us. There are many events and honors that occurred throughout Chauncey's life, his ballooning life, that were meaningful to him and to us. Many Colorado pilots, including me, owe him a debt of gratitude for his instruction and help in learning how to fly and enjoy ballooning. There's no doubt Chauncey had flaws. I resisted the urge to point out more of them today. I encourage you all to swap illustrative stories later, but let me say with all his ballooning accomplishments and flaws, however many of each, Chauncey loved very deeply during his life, and he was loved. Those 2 are his finest accomplishments in his life. Not so long ago, he was asked to speak about some ballooning that might not be so familiar to people as the high-altitude flights. He responded with a short summary of having flown the Grand Canyon, the Great Lakes, over the Continental Divide, from the Bahamas to Florida, South America, New Zealand, Switzerland, France, England, and most every state in the United States. From his favorite memory collection comes the time that as the hare hound race, he ran smack into the water tower at Simpson College right here. That memory included his compliments to the solid engineering and unshakable mounting job. When asked about the ultimate highlight of his ballooning career by this same reporter, Chauncey gave a lovely answer that spoke to what ballooning meant to him. And I'll wrap up with this. He thought for only a few seconds, and he told the guy, the terrific friends that we made, the scenery we got to see, and the wonderful times we had, it was the ultimate.
The floor's open if anyone has a story they want to share about Chauncey. Well, plenty of time later to talk. All right.
I'll quiet man. My mother put on a balloon race at the Tetons, a 5 balloon race. So obviously, not expecting big mass ascensions. But the idea was to attract a lot of people, spectators. So it was keep the balloons up as long as possible. And in the Tetons, they had circular wings. It's come back this way, right off the mountain, come back on the ground, back, round, circle, circle, circle. So they did two main events. One was the maximum duration, minimum distance, which is the one I'm going to mention. The other was a card race, which they all cheated. But their idea for the maximum duration, minimum distance, was obviously be up there as long as you can, land as close as you took off. My mother flew for about 2.5, 3 hours, landed somewhere close to where she was, maybe a couple hundred feet away. She wasn't worried about it. My father had taken competition years serious. This was something he wanted to win. There was a tacky, awful trophy on the line, which there actually wasn't. It was all just bragging rights. And he flew for about 3.5 hours and landed about 15 feet from where he took off. And he was just sure. The other two pilots who had flown up here, they did pretty much like my mother did. They had a nice time, they flew for several hours, they landed comfortably, weren't worried. But my father was sure, this is gonna win. I was up a long time, I landed real close. Chauncey had a different attitude. He had no interest in second place on this. So he took off close to a tree, and he grabbed that tree. And he stayed in that tree. And he watched everybody else as he's in this tree. One hand on the tree, the other hand on the burner. Who's landing first? That's one. Another hour passes. There's somebody. Okay. Kaplan, land. Well, finally, my father did land, 3.5 hours later. Chauncey's still holding on to that tree. And he made sure for another 45 minutes, he was holding on to that tree. Let go of the tree, came down, 5, 10 feet away from where he took off. Hand would barely loosen. Packed up the balloon, they're all going, okay, I won, right? My father, however, had different thoughts. No, you didn't win. You're holding on to that bush. That was a tree. That was a bush. 2.5 hours of bush versus tree discussion. I have no idea who declared the winner. Like I said, it was only bragging rights. They didn't even take anything home. If Chauncey were here, if my father were here. Bush! Tree!